Welcome back to What Problem Are You Solving? The greatest lean startup, entrepreneurship, intrapreneurship, and all things awesomeness podcast that you've seen today. So, you know who I am, John Ruark, Adam Burke, Ty Smith, and special guest, Sam McAfee. As always, we'll start off with the usual question. Adam, what problem are you solving this week?
All right, so my friend Craig Strong used to say, "Stop starting, start finishing." So, well,
I like
hold on. Don't applaud. Hold your applause. Hold your applause.
Oh, jeez.
So
you got my hopes up.
So the Fantasy Unicorn League with the fantasy, that is still in effect, and I think we're going to do something with it because I was at a pitch competition last week downtown in Detroit. I think there's something to the Fantasy Unicorn League. However, I want to do something that does not scale. Been working with a lot of accelerators. I want to see what would happen if we put the entire ecosystem of Michigan around one founder who deserves it. He's got 5 or 10 people he wants to meet, and there's hundreds of mentors, all this stuff. So I want to see if we can make 10 introductions by next week to one founder working on a mental health startup, and that's it. So do we have some B-roll here, or are we going to plug it at the end of the show?
We're gonna roll that
We're gonna roll
beautiful bean footage.
Chiron, I think they call it.
So I would like either people listening directly that empathize and are this person that he wants to interview, or more importantly, people that can help us connect to the colleges working with nursing students, female nursing students.
Nursing students.
So
reach out.
If that resonates, yes. But if you're not the students themselves, he doesn't want to talk to. I don't want to complicate this. It's their instructor or their professors or their department heads. So that's specifically who he wants to talk to. So if you are that person, or you can connect him to that person, reach out to me on LinkedIn. That is the most locked in ask I can get. All right.
The customer segment. I like it.
I'm done.
Awesome. Sam, what problem are you solving this week?
What problem am I solving? So this week I am up to my eyeballs in customer interviewing for our diagnostic product. And so I am on the hunt for more people that we can interview. And specifically what we're looking for is mostly technology leaders, folks who oversee a team or several teams who would be interested in taking a look at it, doing basically a recorded live kind of walkthrough demo and combined interview with us to get their take and help us validate some assumptions we have, and also like iron out, we know that there are still, unfinished rough bits in the product, and some of them we know what they are. So when we hear people point those out, it's validation. We know it's broken, we'll fix it. But also there have been some surprising insights. And so I'm looking for more people to come and kick the tires on this thing with us so that we can learn from that and improve it and push out some new versions with better stuff. That's my current problem I'm solving this week.
Nice. Awesome. All right. Thank you. Ty, what problem are you solving this week?
Hey, John, let's see. What am I solving? It always feels like I got a ton of things that I'm working on, some personal, some professional. I'm just going to stay away from the personal for right now, but my professional thing that I'm working on is trying to figure out a new role that I just got some clarity on, where I'm a senior advisor for an emerging research institution. That institution is going to be working focused on it's going to be kind of like Stanford or Georgia Tech or where you went over at Johns Hopkins, John, but looking at being a pulling all the historically Black colleges and universities together to kind of figure out how do they create like AI and some of the other things, the more scientific stuff, and then figure out what that looks like in terms of commercialization, because it's how you make money for an institution, right? Your research is what pays the bills. So we're working on that right now. So it's kind of fun.
Nice.
How about you, John?
Well, I'm
What are you
glad you
working
asked,
on?
Ty.
Well, I'm glad I asked you, John.
Let's see. Out of many things, like I'm with you. Like there's always a million things going through my head, and I fill space. I don't like to sit still. I like to start new projects if I don't. But professionally, I'll narrow it down to two things. One, I'm trying to influence a large organization's AI strategy when they have no money to execute.
Right. Mm.
They know they want to do AI, but they have no money. So, helping them figure out what can they do on borrowed resources, right? And actually get them to walk through some of the play to win strategy and good strategy, bad strategy there, as well as help a project roll out a brand new DevOps pipeline. So those are my two simple challenges. I should be able to knock that out this week. I'll have it done by Friday. Don't worry about it. So
Just make sure you don't get paid in artificial currency. Artificial. Don't get paid in
the artificial currency.
Don't get paid. Don't get paid in.
I get paid in Bitcoin. Don't worry about it. It's all good. All right. Well, awesome. This is super fun. Glad to have you, Sam, on the show because we wanted to talk about this week about startup patterns. And so what are the things that we see as coaches, consultants, clients, and all that help people navigate this uncertainty? Because one thing that really drew me to this lean startup movement is the fact that there is a methodology. There's a repeatable way to navigate that messy middle, that scribble diagram, right? Where it feels like there's no way out, but yet if you go through the motions enough, you can start to see patterns emerge, whether they be through, running experiments or just actually trusting the process and going through it. And so tonight, wanted to just kind of pick your brain and have you share some lessons learned that you've experienced working with a variety of startups and entrepreneurs, and how, what insights have you gained? What have you helped them discover, and how have you guided them through that process? So start at the top, Sam.
Start at the top. All right. Well, here's how I would enter that conversation. So functionally, my background is as a software engineer. So in the 25 or so years I've been involved in tech companies and tech startups, I probably only started to admit that I don't code anymore about 3 or 4 years ago. But like all the rest of that time, I mean, I was definitely, I can basically admit now I'm sort of not. I'm a former engineer.
They got AI for that now. Don't worry about it. You're good.
I mean, just in time, right?
John, that sounds like you, man.
I was gonna say former engineer meet recovering engineer. Is that your?
Yeah. So I think the two biggest intellectual movements that were most impactful for me in my career, two obvious ones, but I'll be explicit, are the agile movement, which I feel fortunate that the timeline of agile basically tracks with my own career. Like I basically started in late 99, 2000. By about 02, 03, I was learning about this agile stuff. I wasn't there like right at the beginning, but like pretty early on. And so agile was very meaningful for me for a long time. And then later, the lean startup movement was the other big, intellectual pillar that, I really lean on those two things. And I think that one of the things that is important to me for folks to understand is, in a way, they both are basically manifestations of the scientific method. Like we have hypotheses and we are working in bits and pieces to try to remove uncertainty from a problem space. They both sort of address that in different ways. And I think that there's a certain mechanic or dynamic to following the process, but it's also important to remember that there's a human element as well. And like, we have to remember science is messy, right? Like, you think about all the sort of historical people tinkering in labs and places like that. Like, sometimes you're like super high, you're figuring all this stuff, you're making all this progress, and then wham, there's sort of like the trough of despair where like, you spend months banging your head against the wall. There are some really hard problems. And so I think there's also a human element that I've discovered in how people approach experiments and how they integrate experimental thinking and action into their daily work, into their businesses. And we're talking about uncertainty, and that like people react in a variety of ways to uncertainty. Like some people really crave it. They're comfortable in that environment. I think I have historically been fairly comfortable with ambiguity and uncertainty. And then there are other people that are more comfortable in more with more structure, more definition, and yet I think the process actually kind of oscillates between those two domains pretty regularly. So for me, I think that's how I would starting at the top. I think it's all about, like you guys say, like, what problem are you solving, and then that's when the fun starts, because then you have to sort of figure out how are we going to start solving this problem, and there's a lot of creativity and like different directions you can go in and that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's funny. It reminds me that there's an article Ty sent me from like InfoQ like a decade ago, and I can't find it since. I don't know if it's been off their server or whatever, but it was a really cool article because it talked about why Agile works, because it works for the planners and it works for the free spirits, because the planners could say, here's my plan for 2 weeks, I'm going to commit to this plan, and the free spirits are like, I'm just going to try something, and if I fail, I'll adjust every 2 weeks. And so it works for both sets of people, right? And I love how you said that. It provides just enough structure to just start being like a Roomba and just start running into walls until the whole floor is clean. So, yeah, I dig it.
Except those damn engineers now, the new ones, they go in exact straight lines and they map it out.
Of course, you got to have LiDAR and like make sure it's perfectly lined, and you avoid the dog poo. Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's interesting you would say that, because you wouldn't have the ones that have the LiDAR and other radars on them if they wouldn't have done this bumping back and forth and having had just
an innovation.
Right. Sam, I really like the idea, because this one of the things that we talk about all the time is that, at least this is how I offer it up, that everything you never needed to know about Lean Startup you learned in 4th grade science. I saw something, I had a big guess. It made me confused. I created an experiment because I thought it was going to make sure to see what I was going. Did I get it? Yes. Did I get it? No. If I did, wow, I'm a genius. If not, well, there goes we screwed the pooch. And what I try to do is, even in patterns, because I think it was through Roger Martin, he has this book called The Design of Business. He talks about mysteries, heuristics, algorithms. And so you go from these broad ideas, like what in the world is going on, to I'm starting to see a pattern, a heuristic, to, oh, I get it. Is that how you're developing your startup patterns, through this idea, this narrowing funnel of a mystery, a bunch of stuff, a heuristic, some gathering of like items to some algorithm, some sense of pattern? That's just a question. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I think there's some similarities in how we think about it. One of the things that I noticed pretty early on, and in my first book, Startup Patterns, the book actually touches on this right in the beginning. I think in the first chapter, which is an interview with an entrepreneur, and we were talking about this challenge, which is there's a tension between your sort of global and local maximas, right? Like there's a tension between having some sense of vision or direction of where you want to go, and like I don't think you can necessarily just let the Roomba really bump around as your main way of kind of figuring out where you want to go. There's got to be some sort of general directionality that that the entrepreneur, the founders, the founding team, they're going somewhere, right? So the experiments have to sort of fit within a broader directionality, and there's a tension there, right? Because you have this local optimization problem where you may sort of temporarily solve something that makes sense in a constrained area, but actually is detrimental for the larger vision. And sometimes we decide that's actually okay for a while, right? Like, okay, we're gonna sacrifice a little bit to make some progress here. And that's where it gets like really kind of hard and squishy, is kind of figuring out like keeping the increments, the sprints or the experiments kind of within the larger framework of a vision, a narrative, some story that we're telling about sort of the bigger idea. I think a lot of people struggle with that, the tension between those two scales.
Oh, so three concepts came to mind, and it's based on some work that we've done in other part of our work. First one is calculus. There's a startup calculus. And so you said max and mins, right? And we know with calculus, the only way that you can do it is make smaller and smaller increments, right? You're slicing the pie. So you can have, well, maybe it's this, or you slice it. That's the first one. The idea of local optimization, which I think is interesting. I'm a nerd. In my community, we call them blurs, a black nerd, right? So I'm a blurred. Yeah, there you go. Hey, I don't know about you, but never mind, John. You're a nerd too, right? So this idea of local optimization, like how do you optimize in between that? But I think the other thing that in between those increments, right? And you're testing for something. The third one is we actually had an entire podcast about friction and the nature of friction and why friction was important, because you said something like, yeah, you want to like have those points. You're like, is it left? Is it right? I don't know. How do I test that out? How do you account for the calculus of startups, right? Trying to get from that max and mins and doing that, I guess, through sprints, the optimization in local, and then this idea of friction. What does it mean to happen between? Does you understand my question? Where I'm going with this?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot forming in there.
Sorry, that's me.
Good. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a couple things come to mind. I think the first thing that actually you made me think about is really the notion of bias. And like, we're all working really hard to try to be objective when we're doing this work, right? And there is a mythology in Silicon Valley and technology in general that if we work hard enough at it, we can be, 100% objective in our analyses. But that's a falsehood, right? Like we all know that, like, really deep down, we're doing some level of projecting into the data, and like that is how the brain works, right? Like we have to interpret. We're not machines, and so when you're looking at the results of an experiment, there's always this sort of push and pull of is it the result that we wanted, right? And like how much are we willing to take something that maybe didn't.
I hear it all the time.
Please us, and then adapt to that. Like, so I think there are definitely times where I've seen founders struggle with, I mean, we all talked about this for a long time, like, being told your baby is ugly, like you got this beautiful idea and you really want it to work out. And like the data is showing that they're like something's not clicking. And so you really find out what people are made of by how they respond to that situation. So to me, I think that's a predictor of whether a startup is going to survive, a predictor of the success of a group of people trying to build a business around a new product, a new idea, a new service, is really like, how much of a growth mindset do they have? How much can they actually accept data that proves them wrong and celebrate that, right? Like,
Yeah,
you look at like Neil deGrasse Tyson's always talking about like, yeah, if you're proven wrong in science, like that's great, because now there's something new you don't know, and you have to like, and that's someone who's driven by curiosity. So I think if we're driven by a real honest and authentic curiosity, and not just kind of an ego-based, like, I've got this great idea and I want to prove it to the world, if instead you have honest curiosity, you're more likely to be better at doing experiments, and being effective in taking the data, whatever it says, and responding to it in a way that's appropriate, that's not just like clinging to the sort of false hope that your idea is actually a good one.
Well, it's interesting. I'm sorry, guys, because you just sparked another idea, and that is a couple of session episodes ago, we talked about behavioral economics. Right, we had a really good, rich discussion about behavioral economics, and something you said actually is interesting. Like, are you afraid? Well, you didn't say afraid. Those are my words. Like, your ability to be curious, your ability to anticipate all and to take in when it doesn't fit your own particular psychological or theoretical bias. And so in startup patterns, I'm gonna pull a little bit on a friend of ours, David Bland's, the feasible, viable, desirable, right? Next. Oh, shut up! This has been a running joke, by the way. But also,
totally swear next week.
But Clay Christensen's job to be done, right? So either one of those three. Are you finding
and Bob
functional
and Bob's job to be done?
Yes, exactly. Do you find functional patterns, social patterns, and emotional patterns in startups, right? That allow that you can start to maybe that's what your tool, your assessment is by finding those. And if I don't mean to step on but you spark this idea of patterns that are, I can take it, I get it, but I don't like to have somebody tell me my baby is ugly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yes. So yes, you can find them. We deal with a lot with that notion, and some of the new stuff that we've been working on is extending that idea. Originally, when I was writing startup patterns, the idea came from the notion of design patterns, right? So like, you've got design patterns architecturally, the sort of original kind of Bible, and then that's really heavily built into software engineering best practices, is the idea of like, there are solutions that you can identify that have kind of a recipe, and if the context is similar enough, you can take that recipe that had worked somewhere else like it, and you can apply this pattern here. So in software, a lot of architecture works around different kinds of design patterns. There are some classic ones. There's always people coming up with new ones. And so I was really trying to extend that notion to what I was seeing in startups, that there are certain patterns of behavior, of structure, of attitude and mindset that are more or less likely to be successful, or likely to engender success in that organization. Success simply being defined as like not going out of business in your first year or two, right? Like, it doesn't have to be a unicorn that's many billions of dollars. It can be just like a healthy running business that is able to solve a meaningful problem in the world and perpetuate itself through a value exchange that allows it to keep surviving. So that's my, that level of success, these patterns do show up. And I think that what has happened for us as we've looked at this more and more and worked with lots and lots of organizations, some startups, some big organizations trying to behave like startups or spinning up parts of their organization like accelerators and things like that, or innovation labs that are borrowing those startup patterns into their larger institution. We would see this all happen, but we also started to notice that there are leadership and organizational patterns and anti-patterns. I think it's also helpful to be aware of the concept that we also talk in our industry about anti-patterns, like dysfunctional behaviors. Like if you see this, there's some causality behind it that you can explain, like, you have to fix a few things because this bad sort of behavior keeps happening. So we look at those, and what started to occur to us was that, I mean, a lot of my focus initially was on the team building the product. So like, how does the design, engineering, and product, primarily, maybe some other functions as well, sales, marketing, whoever else is pitching in, data. But how does this cross-functional team go from, we have an idea and we're testing it and we're talking to customers and we're prototyping, we're building things all the way to building something successful, that if that team is operating within an organization that fundamentally has a different philosophy and a different value system that does not enable those behaviors successfully, if the team just kind of keeps running into institutional walls, it can be said that the people sort of operating at the organizational level or the leadership level have a very different mindset than what the team, the teams themselves and what they're trying to do. And so we started to notice leadership and organizational patterns at work as well that would either be engender or support the kinds of product development best practices we were encouraging folks to do, or hinder and undermine those, and not necessarily with any nefarious intent. No. Like a lot of times it's just people kind of looking at different parts of the elephant, and at cross purposes, and not really talking to each other and not really fully aligned on what's important. So we were definitely seeing a lot of that. And so
I'm glad you brought up.
Yeah, sorry.
I'm glad you brought up like the human operating system layer of this thing too, because that's something that, again, a lot of people don't tend to think about. Again, they usually start with the tech, right, and they try to navigate their way to sell the tech, right. But you reminded me of the Eric Ries quote that a startup is a human institution, right, designed to deliver a product or service in extreme uncertainty, right. So it's a human institution, so it means it actually has to deal with people. Right.
Yeah.
And people aren't always the most reliable and don't act in their best interests, like we talked about in the behavioral science, behavioral nudging episode. And then to your point, I learned so much from Mr. Ty over here about organizational dynamics. Again, being a recovering engineer, I was like, well, just follow the process and the process should work. And it's like, yeah, that's cute, John. But then you got people in the way who have incentives that are doing things in a different way. Again, sometimes nefarious, sometimes innocent. But either way, it's not designing for success, right? So I think that's a good point to highlight, that we tend to think of the lean startup process as something repeatable, scientific, and yet at the same time we're dealing with irrational human beings trying to navigate a scientific process. So yeah, that's an excellent point.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious because to the idea of rationality and patterns, how does startup patterns account for chaos? And chaotic systems they're natural. They're naturally occurring. All it takes is a perturbation in one part of the system, and it'll eventually, in a much larger way, what is it, Gauss law, John? Small changes have large impacts, or about complexity, right? Large complex organizations can't devolve into simple organizations, but
you have to start over with a simple system.
Exactly.
That works. Mm-hmm.
So how does startup patterns account for chaos or chaotic episodes? For instance, I remember John and I were working at an agency, and the next thing we know, we all at home. sometime around March of 2020. Like, what the hell happened?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And we actually worked with an organization that heretofore before then said we can only get stuff done if we're inside of a building. Well, they couldn't
Yeah.
get everything done, but they literally were able to have a higher level of production, like a much higher level of production, even in a chaotic environment known as COVID.
Yeah.
And so, how do you account for or examine chaotic opportunities, either as a way to devolve a startup or actually evolve a startup?
Right. I love it. I love it. So how do startup patterns deal with and account for the presence of chaos? Our number one is we try not to contribute to it. That's our first step.
Don't kill the patient. Don't kill the patient.
Do no harm, right?
Right, exactly. Slightly more serious note. I'm a big fan of the Cynefin framework, Dave Snowden's Cynefin framework. Actually, one of the first times I really got to hang out with David Bland, who we were talking about earlier, was at a lean startup unconference where, there was a slot, and I think David asked if I would pair with him on a Cynefin, like a quick Cynefin workshop for people that were there. And we barely knew each other at the time. It was super fun. And but so I think there are elements of this model, this framework that can be super helpful. So we're showing it on the screen for folks who don't know, but I think one way to think about it is that that if the whole idea behind this is you have to apply methods that are appropriate to the domain that you're in. And as you can see, like one of the domains is the chaotic domain. And if you're in the chaotic domain, you got a little bit sort of splash and scramble around until you can grab something to hold on to and slowly drag yourself out of the chaotic domain. And so like systems that are highly rigid are more likely to be very, very detrimentally disrupted by the introduction of chaos than systems that are resilient or adaptable. Or it's not my favorite book, but it's kind of interesting. Anti-Fragile. Just that idea that there's some resilience in the system. There, the whole idea behind lean and Kanban in particular. You have a lot of buffers in the system, like there's slack, so things aren't sort of completely blocked out and 100% capacity, and everything is down to the last decimal precision. I think instead, most that would be more like Six Sigma, which we could get into if we wanted to. I like to pick on them, but like really the core sort of essence of lean is sort of expandable, contractible buffers and slack space that allow flow to go through a system, right? And so you have to have flexibility. It's just like when you're, just like our bodies, right? And as we get, older, like they say, to remain healthy, like you have to have, strength and flexibility. Right, in order to not have muscle injuries or have them not be so bad, that sort of thing, to rebound more quickly. So there's really something about systems needing to be able to flex and bend that is really important. And those are not properties of most organizations that we have inherited as the legacy of 20th century industrial Taylorist, Fordist production. Like mass production. Mass production produced organizations that are highly rigid and structured, right? They're not particularly adaptable. And I think that's a lot of what has made them susceptible to disruption from startups, right? Because of that lack of adaptability. Startups can just move more quickly. They can pivot. They can be more flexible. So I don't know how where we
cool.
came from.
No, that's cool. That's cool because we talked about COVID being this external disruption, right? It was a natural response, a natural phenomena that came out that impacted entire systems, kind of literally moving systems, transportation systems, economic systems. But what happens with, because I'm on the phone with folks, and I'll be doggone as a person who advises startups. And if I hear another person say, well, they got money because they had AI. Hey, AI, they got AI too. Can I get an AI? You got AI? Here's some money for AI. It's almost an artificially driven disruption. And so how does a startup get their head around, because literally I'm dealing with startups right now. They're like, oh, damn, do I have enough AI in my system to respond so I don't get steamrolled? And I think that what the four of us would say is make sure you solve the problem, understand the problem first, right? Get to the core of the problem before you try to apply some technology, because otherwise you're just chasing, you're ambulance chasing. That's just a thought. I'm just wondering where you're at with that.
No, I mean, look, we're at this weird inflection point, and things are kind of frothy and hypey and right now. I mean, we've seen it with other domains. We saw it with crypto and cloud and mobile and lots of things that have come before. There's a point where I'm not in any doubt about the profound impact that AI will ultimately have on every aspect of our lives and our industries. But where we are in that story right now is the dusty, crazy gold rush part of it, right? Where 90% of the startups that are AI startups that are getting funded right now are going to die and not come back. And there will be a few. I mean, already that particular sector is heavily dominated by the bigger players anyway. I mean, I know there are some successful upstart AI companies that will do well. I mean, they'll get acquired or what have you. But you really look at it, I mean, it's the big Microsoft, Meta, Google, Amazon of the world that are really taking kind of the lion's share of that market at the moment. And so, but I think that I'm going to twist us in a slightly different direction, because there's something I was thinking about a couple days ago, and I'm going to write about, Ty. And your question really made me think about this. So you heard it here first. This is sort of a fairly unformed idea that I'm just kicking around. So those are that's my warnings and caveats. But I am thinking a little bit about founders and entrepreneurs. I kind of use those terms interchangeably, however you want to think about it. People who are doing startups, right? So rather than having a regular job, you've decided to go and build your own business of some sort. So now you're a startup. If those people, and there are an increasingly large number of them, it's kind of become mainstream over the time that we've all been doing this, or the last 10 or so years. There's accelerators in every country in the world, and there's a lot of people doing startups. I actually wonder a little bit about startups, founders, the vast majority of them being, in a way, a kind of exploited class. And I'll tell you specifically why. Because I think that during the industrial age, and some of the bigger players that are still around, the General Motors and AT&Ts of the world, the sort of blue chips, we used to do internal R&D. There was R&D was a thing. They would fund it. There's a lab, Bell Labs, whatever. They would come up with stuff. And I think that in the time that I've been in industry, coming out of the 90s, which is a little before my time, the Netflix IPO leading to the sort of massive VC boom of the .com era, the 2000s or so, that now it's almost like these companies have been able to outsource all of their R&D to startups, the vast majority of whom are never going to get a big payout. They're working their butts off to try to, solve one piece of a larger puzzle. And so it is like a lot of relatively low paid, free or underpaid labor running a million different experiments so that venture capital can kind of pick the winners and then sell them to big companies as an acquisition and then, walk away with 100 plus, 100x exit. And so I kind of actually, as I've met more and more founders, I'm finding that there's this real mythology in the zeitgeist that being a startup founder is so awesome and so sexy and everyone should try to do it. And then it's actually really, really hard work. And there's a lot of mental health issues and burnout. And it is not actually easy. And it's not really that sexy most of the time. And so I do see a little bit of a displacement of taking the risk for doing R&D off of big companies that can afford it and having an army of many would-be founders cranking away and doing that R&D instead. It's a little bit like an environmental externality or something like that. I'm seeing that, and so that's as formed as the idea is right now. But I think it ties in with some of the other things.
It's 100%. I mean, it's like playing the lottery. I mean, it's the exact same thing as playing the lottery, and at the individual level, it makes sense because it is worth buying a $1 ticket. You're actually not, even though the math is stacked against you, there's no other possibility to win $100 million. Right. But if you just looked at the odds, it's less than 100 million. It's 1 in 200 million to win 100 million, right? It's just literally math. I think the exact same thing happens with startups, and the way you articulate it as an outsourced externality is exactly right. I don't know if it's intentional or not, but it doesn't matter because if they're gonna, people are going to play with odds outside of their favor, and they think and they want to, and they're going to keep doing it. Why? You're not going to stop them from doing it, and so why would you do it in-house when you can just wait? There's no incentive to bring it back.
Yeah, and I think it's just emergent too. I don't think that this sort of situation was designed necessarily, but it's an emergent property of the way that our innovation ecosystems are set up right now.
I think it is purposeful. There's a couple of reasons. One, that it's to your point, Sam, it's an off books, right? It's not on, I place the bet, it's off books. I know it probably will fail, but I don't have to do it against my P&L sheet. So at the end of the year, when I open up my books and somebody, the SEC comes in, is like, oh, you lost. Hey, it was over there, right? It was R&D, but we didn't have to capitalize the facility cost, right? Or the human, the people costs. That's one. Two, I tell the people that I work with that to think about, if they're a startup, think about where they take money, right? Are you taking money to go get acquired or to grow? And those are two different kinds of money, right? So if I'm planning on an acquisition, hey, I'm gonna take just enough money to go get my money, go on vacation for 2 years, and go start something else later on, right? Because otherwise, I'm literally talking to these guys right now. I'm waiting to sign my NDA, but they're building something that could challenge a big player in the technology market, right? Right now, they're trying to figure out how to get their Series B. They're going for their Series B funding. They're like, we got to do it, but we took so much money in our Series A. We got to figure out how not to lose our shirts. That idea that you do it so bad that you walk away with nothing because your investors have everything. We're trying to figure that out. And I think number three, from a tech space, the only place where you're not going to get your, excuse me, John, I know this is PG-13, your ass handed to you is if you, cover your ears, John. Is
pearls.
Get your pearls.
Earmuffs.
Is right now, the federal government has, they're not doing what the Chinese do, is betting on the winners. They're placing small bets around. They're saying, we just want the tech. You keep all the money, you keep all your IP, give you 2 years. We don't want any of the largesse out of it. There's no equity that we're just keep it all. Just build, baby, build. And anybody that has technology that I'm working with, I'm like, if you go to a VC, or you go to a corporation and ask for money, I'm going to punch you in the face.
Yeah.
Right. I'm going to punch you in the face because it's stupid. House always wins. Right. It's Vegas.
Yeah, exactly. It ties you down. It puts certain constraints around you that are really, really hard to unwire. And I mean, we've seen many companies that get an A round and they get some kind of crazy valuation that's pretty unrealistic. And then you look at the next 2-3 years where they're trying to get, now they have to prove it to get to the B level, and they are just crushing everyone who works there, is constantly ground down. And it's like, revenue, growth. And it's miserable. It's a miserable place to work. Nobody wants to work in companies like that, right? So then people start leaving, and it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy downward spiral sort of thing.
So maybe those are the patterns that we're talking about, like the emotional, social patterns.
Yeah, for sure.
Got it.
Yeah. So, and there's something like that you said earlier, Ty, I want to bring us back to, because I think, as we've talked about before, that, it started patterns, mindfulness is really important to us. And we're kind of promoting the idea that one of the things that would make the world better, more livable place in the future is if there were more mindful product companies. So we're thinking about companies that build products, for to solve many of the really hard problems that we have, that we're facing. And that for us, I think it's important that these companies, like the kind of companies we want to work with, that we want to help, they're trying to succeed by building a product that solves problems their customers have, but they're also aware of the impact on their own employees and on the people in the communities that they impact. So there's the customer segment, but there are these two other constituencies, the folks that work there, and how are they doing? Are they well paid? Are they doing well? Are they like constantly needing therapy because work is so damn stressful? And thinking about, okay, all those externalities, are we, like the classic ones, are we polluting? Are we, offloading a bunch of our workload through Mechanical Turk to, underpaid people, somewhere else? Like really thinking about the impact on the world. Are they generally adding more harm or taking harm away from the sort of global picture, right? Like that's kind of how I assess, companies that, we want to work with. They don't have to be like saving the whales all day long. Like they could just be doing a sort of normal business. But what is in their calculus in terms of what are they making the world a better place or not? And that's, everyone sort of defines that in their own way, but like, do they have a story about why that is? And can they explain it to you? That's something that's really important to us.
Yeah. I'll put my last comment in, and then Adam gets the last word. So, but yeah, it kind of reminds me of the Ikigai framework, where it's that intersection of what you love, what you're good at, what you're paid for, which is where most startups stop, right? But because then now you're adding that fourth element, which is what the world needs, right? That mindfulness is this contributing to the greater good, or is this detracting from a standard that we collectively agree on? And so I think that's great that you're explicitly highlighting the need for this mindful startup to include all four of these sections as well. So thank you. Yeah. So appreciate that. And that's my last comment before we wrap up. So I'll hand it over to Adam for his insights.
All right. So I was going to sneak in OKRs much earlier, but when we're using OKRs, obviously there's sort of the nuance. Not everyone, but there's the basics. And then there's sort of this idea that one key result shouldn't be sabotaging another, right? Internally, right? And so you can't just increase customer acquisition at the expense of, churn or something. And so I think you're the expert in internal OKRs and how people even figure out, if it is actually having that internal externality. But it sounds like what you're almost doing is creating the secondary layer to an external externality with the same OKRs. Is that fair? Is that how sort of the practical part of this is working? And is that how you see it, or am I way off?
No, I think it's a good way of framing things, Adam. I think that the part of how I see it is that there is a relationship between how the organization deals with its internal work and how it affects the rest of the world. And those are often mutually reinforcing. So organizations that are made up of people who tend to care about each other and are collaborative and supportive, and yeah, they may disagree and there's debate and stuff, but there's like generally collegial respect, psychological safety, tend to produce better products and outcomes for their customers and for the rest of the world as well. So I think there's a strong correlation in terms of, is the company doing good in the world in any sort of meaningful way, and is that a place you would want to work too? Like, for me, like, those often go together, right? Is the environment kind of like fairly coarse and toxic and very stressful, and it's kind of like hard to go home and forget about work and be with your family, and like, are they just cranking out more plastic? Like, there's probably some connection there. I can't prove that to you empirically, but like, from what I've seen, I think I have a pretty good intuition, and I sense that there's definitely a strong correlation between that internal and external view.
That's interesting. I want to see you solve that problem first. I can't help but think of like what happens in the good situation, where the environment's good, the culture's good, the intent is good, and I don't want to name names, but like I will. Tom Shoes, all good intent, inspired not just themselves but a million different copycats, and then we're undercutting the local economies, accidentally. So how do you even get? Obviously, first you have to solve the culture problem, then you have to solve the internal externality, then you have to solve the intentionally bad externalities, but then how do you get to event? Play Pump is another example where like a lot of these human-centered design examples with good intent, positive impact, but I have no doubt that if anyone in the world
seemed like a good idea at the time.
Yeah, exactly, but like you don't even, and you wouldn't have known until you do a full feedback. Like, it's when you have good intent, you then need that full learning cycle to see like, oh, this wasn't having the impact that we thought it was, or it's actually having this negative impact. That there's like sort of a negative impact that we're making more plastic, we're making our employees sick, versus these unintended externalities that are genuinely unknowable up front. I think it's interesting.
But it's part of what makes startups so hard too. In order to make a healthy company that's going to last, like, I'm going to be a little flippant here, perhaps hyperbolic. I think it's relatively easy to make a crappy startup. Like, you can make a startup that's like fast moving, squeezing value in sort of nefarious ways. Like, people do it. It doesn't last forever, but like, you can get some bang for your buck if you're going to be kind of, shady and not really care about ethics and morals and stuff. It is much harder to build a healthy organization that really supports all of your employees and supports the community that you're in, and is really creates a positive and meaningful and valuable experience for your customers. That's hard work, and precious few are doing it these days. I'd like to see a lot more companies taking on that challenge.
That's a nice way to wrap things up. So, Sam, where can we find you? Where can we find anything you're working on?
Oh, absolutely. I'm all over LinkedIn. So I love it when people reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Sam McAfee.
I like to.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Am I cutting out?
Nope, you're good.
Yeah. Okay. LinkedIn, Sam McAfee, and startuppatterns.com is where our business of operations is, or our place of business. So either of those two places, I'd love to talk with people about any of these issues if you feel so inspired. I take almost every call because I like meeting new people. So please reach out.
Nice, you're a people person. I love it. Awesome. Thanks, Sam, for coming on. This was great. Love to have you back on any time. Ty, final thoughts?
I appreciate the work that you're doing, Sam, around mindful organizations. I think it is a powerful way to think about some of the things that I get involved with, thinking about the unconscious in organizational life, the stuff that we can't see, the stuff that impacts how we relate to one another. We have this concept that I introduced here. It's called BART, Boundaries, Authorities, Roles, and Tasks. If that stuff isn't clear, then what you end up with is a lot of confusion, right? When it's clear, work gets done because people feel engaged. They feel a part of the community. They know what they're supposed to be doing. They know who they're supposed to be doing it with. They know why they're there. Any one of those, that's when you get, especially if you have, could you call bad startup, bad leadership? I just need to get stuff out. People be damned. I'm just going to get it out. And so I appreciate you doing that work.
Thanks, Ty.
Sweet. Adam, anything else?
I will see you on Mackinac Island for the retreat, but for everyone to understand this inside joke, you're going to have to watch the next time Sam joins us on the show.
Yeah, we didn't get to the horse stuff, but
it's all right.
We'll do that next time.
Leave something to be desired.
That's right.
Sounds like too much information. All right. Well, good stuff.
How about you, John?
This has been great, and I really, this took an interesting turn than the way I thought, right? Because of some of the patterns include the psycho-organizational dynamics, which, again, is not where my head goes as a recovering engineer. And so I was expecting more technical patterns, but I think it's great that you certainly highlighted those, which then was a great segue into the mindful organization, the mindful startup, because that's really what it is all about. If you're trying to make an impact in the world, then you really should be focusing on that, as well as building cool tech that people want. So
yeah.
Head over to youtube.com/@whatpays. Make sure you subscribe so we can grow our YouTube channel. And yes, this has been awesome. Please. So thank you so much. We will see you next week. Have a good night.